There's a new technology out there now. It's called spiral modulation. It made my heart explode out of my chest and my brain just got so big. I said, "You've got to be kidding me. This is the answer to all of our problems." And it's been 5 years and that technology has not taken off. Believe it or not, I worked on President Reagan's Star Wars. It really did happen. There's a little backstory there I'll share with everybody. That was actually a poker game Reagan was playing with Gorbachev. Reagan told Gorbachev that we had lasers orbiting the Earth and we could obliterate them from orbit. And he hired 300,000 engineers, gave them scholarships to go to school. And it turned out to be, he played the right card and the wall came down in 1989. We've had attacks in the cyberspace, but we haven't had an attack on the spectrum yet, but just wait because it's...
Hi guys, let's welcome Melinda Tourangeau to the show. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
You certainly did.
Oh yeah, I actually tried it a few times. Is it a French last name?
Very much. And you said it perfectly, so thank you. It rhymes with banjo.
Nice, cool. Well, you have served in the U.S. Air Force and worked in the defense industry for over 35 years. So, what's your story and what you learned over more than 3 decades?
That's a great question to start with, Danny. My story is I was good at math and science, and my dad saw an opportunity for me to go into laser engineering. So I went to Georgia Tech, got a degree in electrical engineering, and then went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and worked in the laser lab at Air Force Research Lab, which then was called Wright Research and Development Center. Believe it or not, I worked on President Reagan's Star Wars. It really did happen. There's a little backstory there I'll share with everybody. That was actually a poker game Reagan was playing with Gorbachev. Reagan told Gorbachev that we had lasers orbiting the Earth and we could obliterate them from orbit. And he hired 300,000 engineers, gave them scholarships to go to school. And it turned out to be, he played the right card and the wall came down in 1989. So that's a lot of the reason why there was a lot of momentum in the 80s to study lasers. Anyway, that was the start of my career. I got my master's at AFIT in semiconductor physics, and it was just a wonderful time to serve in the Air Force, and I loved it. And I did elect to get out in the early 90s. They had an option to do that and went into a very unusual job, the electromagnetic spectrum, which at the time we were transmitting data over analog cellular. You weren't even born yet, but we were doing 14.4 kbps with little PCM-CIA cards in our laptops and these little antennas sticking out of them. It was an amazing time, and I went to work for Bell Atlantic Mobile right when the cellular network was being built and right when CDMA, which was the first move away from analog cellular to digital cellular, became the main protocol for what we have today. And so I was in all of this before people had flip phones and phones in their cars. I remember I was on the highway in rush hour traffic. We were at a dead stop, moving along, and he literally got my attention. He said, "Who are you talking to?" I said, "I'm on my phone." This was 1996. I was working for Bell Atlantic Mobile. They outfitted my car. So anyway, that started a career in the electromagnetic spectrum that brought all my defense background into my current profession. And I learned how the cellular network got deployed. It was fascinating. We have these base stations. You see these antennas. They're decorated like pine trees all over the place. And I was there at the very beginning. Anyway, fast forward a little further, worked for Sun Microsystems for 4 years. They, of course, were pioneers in server technology, computer chips, and things like that. And then went back to the defense industry with BAE Systems and worked on some of the most compelling military programs in the electromagnetic spectrum. The biggest one being, of course, the IED situation. I mean, that was really a tragic situation. We deployed forces to the theater and we gave them radios, and we didn't really train them what it meant to operate in the spectrum. And so they would shut off their jammers to communicate and they would get blown up. And it was a really serious issue. I was in very early on that, 2006, 2007, and that motivated a call, I realized that we really needed a paradigm shift in the electromagnetic spectrum for the entire defense industry. And that is what prompted me to start the RVJ Institute with my husband. And we were working on a paradigm shift in the electromagnetic spectrum. And that sort of shaped my career. And then a couple of years ago, my husband turned to me and said, Melinda, you've always wanted to get your doctorate. Why don't you do it now? They're offering a veteran discount at an online school. Why don't you go do it? And I said, yes. So for the last 3.5 years, I've been working on my doctorate in leadership, and I am studying the very hot topic of remote work and its impact on employee engagement and leadership approach.
Yeah, interesting because I'm just 23 and I never worked in the office. I only worked remotely as a software developer. So we can definitely talk about that. But you said you were one of the 300 students for the scholarship for that laser program.
300,000 across the
Okay.
United States between 1982-ish and 1988. Yes.
hmm I I didn't know that Gorbachev played poker. I thought it's more like an American game and he would know the rules, but apparently he.
Well, I'm using it as a metaphor. It was just a con. It was a con game. President Reagan, he hired these 300,000 engineers to make it look like he really had an industrial network to build such a thing like a laser
Mm.
satellite network that really could do what he was saying. And that's what he needed young kids like us for.
Interesting. And you said that it contributed to, to the victory in the Cold War eventually?
Yes, 1989, when President Reagan said in such a profound way, Mr. Gorbachev, bring down this wall, or something to that effect. Yes, it catalyzed the end of the Cold War.
And how it did that in 7 years after, Reagan started that initiative, were there some breakthroughs in this field or some new technology or what drove this change?
Well, the challenges in the 80s with lasers were power and swap, and those remain today. Swap being size, weight, and power. Those problems remain today. Lasers are very sensitive to the environment in which they're installed, and so everything has to be very static and locked down, and then they need a lot of power to drive them. So getting them onto platforms that will make them useful in theater is very challenging, and it was challenging 30 years ago. So putting a laser on a satellite to actually perform electromagnetic attack is still a very challenging problem. Star Wars is not here yet.
Yeah, interesting. So your expertise lies in the field of EMS, which is electromagnetic spectrum, right?
Yes, that's right.
Could you give me a quick overview of what it is, just to understand the basics as a person who, who has some ideas in mind, but I don't really know much about that.
Well, I sure can. Let's see. I haven't had to do this in a while, but the electromagnetic spectrum is the fabric upon which we are doing everything. Everything that we do, from our phones to being on the computer. Way before you were born, Danny, there was this thing called the telephone network. It was POTS, plain old telephone service. It was EJ11 coaxial kind of cable specially designed, and the way we communicated across this entire world was across wired communication. Now the entire backbone of the internet, of the telephone, if you can't even really call it that anymore, of communication, the backbone of communication and the internet and information, and everything that we're doing today is now ethereal, it's intangible, it's spectrum. It is created by a very complex design of antennas around the world. And this is such an important aspect of our defense because it's entirely vulnerable. We've had attacks in the cyberspace, but we haven't had an attack on the spectrum yet. But just wait, because it's coming. And when it happens, there's going to be a huge, well, shift in priorities. Let's put it that way. But getting back to your question, did that explain to you what we're talking about here? It's the electromagnetic airwaves, the way we transmit data between antennas.
So basically, different wavelength define different types of It's almost like the radio in my mind, like,
Yes.
changing.
Well, so the rate, okay, early radios transmitted at one frequency band, but now we have all manner of frequency bands to transmit everything from text to video to radio to a telephone call, and the spectrum keeps getting sliced into smaller and smaller so that we can utilize it with greater efficiency, but there will be a hard limit eventually. And that is where the challenge lies. And that's why we need innovation and a paradigm shift in how we've deployed the electromagnetic spectrum network to serve our needs. And we really need to be looking at very, very novel solutions for the future. I hope I explained that well.
Yeah, yeah. So it's almost like, if we look up into history of computers, and they got smaller and smaller, and the same idea is here, where we slice more and more these frequencies, and but there's a limit to what we can do there. So is that the paradigm shift you were talking about earlier that you've been trying to promote for the last few decades?
Yes. Well done, Danny. You're a great moderator and a good listener. Yes. What I'm talking about here is not gear, not sexy gear, making our sexy gear better. I'm talking about a literal transition of the mind, a mindset change, because we need to be thinking about the spectrum holistically and how we all operate in it together. So, just by virtue of the fact that our Department of Defense is divided into 5 domains, that is not conducive to a mindset that is going to cooperate in the electromagnetic spectrum. So, the mission of the RVJ Institute, the 501c3 nonprofit research institute that I started about 7 years ago, was to raise awareness and to have a culture change among the users of the spectrum so that things like that IED tragedy would not happen, so that soldiers and operators would understand when they go into the theater now, they will be denied spectrum. They may not be able to operate. Will certainly not be able to use their equipment and their communication equipment. So what are the backup plans? Because our adversaries have told us in no uncertain terms that they intend to deny us access to the spectrum. And yet it is the area that the Department of Defense has spent the least on over these last 3 decades to manifest. In fact, I do want to mention, I really hope, Mr. Hegseth, you're listening. I really hope you want to make our forces more lethal. You better have a change in mindset on the electromagnetic spectrum on your list.
Yeah, and if you're listening, Mr. Hack said, I also want to have you on the podcast, just so he knows.
Good.
Well, interesting. So, I'm gonna be frank. I don't really, obviously, I lack technical knowledge to understand what you're doing. But let's say this paradigm shift happens, and the American Department of Defense, and the way we think about it, we innovate and we come up with this new solution that is safer, that is like one level forward in terms of innovation and stuff. The adversaries, they will still probably steal or copy or come up with similar solutions down the road, just like it was with anything during the Cold War, the atomic bomb, the space race, etc. So it, like, to me, even if the US scientists and the military, if we do that first, it's just a matter of time before someone else does the same. So where the benefit lies there, what's the and how long can we rely on this new technology before it gets copied by someone else?
Goodness, you don't miss much. Yes, the art of countermeasure design, development, and deployment has been with us for a good 100 years anyway, and probably well before that. I'm not an operational person, but countermeasures is the natural course of action when the adversary comes up with new technology. I can tell you this, as I said earlier, it's not about making our current gear better. It's about really adopting a paradigm shift in the technology that we've deployed. And I don't want to get too technical here, but I just have to bring the point home that we have been measuring signals with the Fourier transform for about 70 years, 70, 80 years. There is a new technology out there now. It's called spiral modulation, and it detects signals with polynomials rather than with the Fourier transform. And I have known about this technology for 5 years. It made my heart explode out of my chest and my brain just got so big. I said, you've got to be kidding me. This is the answer to all of our problems. And it's been 5 years and that technology has not taken off. Why is that? Well, there are a host of reasons. One thing that really holds back the Department of Defense is the 5001 acquisition process. It is so difficult for small business and innovators to get on contracts. So another one on your list, Mr. Hegseth, is please reform acquisition so that small business and innovators can get onto the government bankroll. But I am talking about such profound paradigm shifts in what we've always done in the electromagnetic spectrum and what we should do. And then to answer your question about longevity and lethality, it's going to take them, well, not nearly as long as we've gotten out of our past innovations, but let's just say many years to decades to come up with a real countermeasure because this new technology is so precise and so refined and very, very difficult to detect with current capability. And so they're going to have to design new detectors, and that's going to be very hard. So we may get a good 5 years of, oh, yeah, we're ahead of the curve, and then another 10 of, they're starting to figure stuff out. But yeah, and maybe in 15 years, it might be outdated, but we need to do it. We need to do it, Danny.
Interesting. You mentioned Fourier transform, and I remember it was part of my calculus back a few years ago, but I never actually used that. But I watched a bunch of YouTube videos about that because, I was always interested in math and stuff like that. And it's interesting how that knowledge helps me better understand what's going on here on the podcast. Sometimes math does help you in life, at least.
Math is a universal language.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree. And, sometimes I just realize that even like concepts that I learned, whatever, in middle school, high school from math, not necessarily, some specific techniques to solve problems, but more like the way of thinking, the way the brain gets wired. It helps me a lot in my day-to-day life to look for solutions for certain problems. So that's interesting. Since we don't have a lot of time, I do want to touch the topic of your remote work studies. You said that you've been working on that for 3.5 years. What prompted you to look into that specific area? If you seem to be more of an engineering person, in between DoD innovations in that circle, but this is more like human resources or management.
Social science.
So,
Yes.
so why did you decide to go to that route?
Boy, Danny, you really don't miss much. Well done. Okay. 25 years ago, I became a first level engineering manager. And if you'll excuse the expression, I sucked at it. Let's all laugh. I was terrible. And so I became fascinated with leadership and in particular technical leadership. And it turns out that technical leadership has a whole other set of challenges from just being a great leader. And I think also I have a legacy of social scientists in my past, my uncle, my grandfather. So it's possible, while I consider myself a Renaissance woman, I probably could have pursued several career fields. But I got into it because I realized that leaders have an incredible responsibility to yield results while they're bringing the team along and building cohesion. And it just fascinated me that I was terrible at it, and that a few technical leaders in my career who just inspired me to be a better version of myself. And I said, what is that je ne sais quoi? And that is what motivated my decision to go to doctorate school. And then the topic of remote work, well, I don't think anybody listening to this podcast can argue how hot that topic is. I had to report to an office for over 30 years, waking up at 05:30, leaving the house at 07:30, reporting by 0800, being in the office at 40 hours a week. If I needed to take time off, I had to give at least 3 days notice, dentist appointments, dog, what have you. And so to watch what's happening today is one of the most fascinating cultural norm shifts that I could have ever anticipated. We have people being asked to return to the office and they say no and they're not fired. We have people just demanding that they be allowed to continue to work remotely. And then, okay, so let's assume remote work is here to stay. What does that mean for cultural norms, organizational and social norms of our work? I mean, the transformation across the globe is undeniable. And so the whole topic just fascinates me. And I also have to get to the bottom of how the power shifted from the employer telling the employee what to do to the employee saying no and being able to keep their job.
Yeah, the power shift. It reminds me of, the this is more like, I guess, social progress since like the 19th century when, the 8-hour shift was introduced,
Yes.
and this is the next step in this paradigm shift, I think.
Yes, and the Industrial Revolution, as it's been
Mm.
coined, and now we have Industry 4.0. Yes, exactly. And the confluence of technology, of leadership, of organizational productivity, of the stock market, of the global economy and global commerce. The confluence of all those factors is just such a complex, a VUCA, to use another coined term, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's a VUCA world, and having a systems engineering background and knowing the power behind treating a lot of our world's problems with systems engineering is just fascinating to me. And so I continue the journey to study.
All right, and since we have just a few minutes left, you mentioned this one of the words was uncertainty, and this period of our life for the whole world, I'd say the past few years, maybe 5 years since COVID, it's been a lot of changes, and I don't think a lot of things will stabilize. How do you live a profound and happy life and a successful life in times of uncertainty?
First, by not viewing uncertainty as the enemy, but rather an opportunity. Our primal instincts are to avoid and reduce uncertainty at all costs. And you can take that back as far as you'd like to the caveman periods, where if you didn't know where the tiger was lurking, you were going to be dead. Our brains are literally wired to reduce uncertainty. So, but the other beautiful thing we have going here is an incredible opportunity for emotional intelligence and self-awareness and making our brains work for us, not our programmed bodies telling our brains what to do. So the first thing we need to do is change our view of uncertainty from the enemy to opportunity. And then the second thing becomes stay informed and be very careful about that because not everything you read is true. May I urge everyone to triangulate your data. Do not believe anything you read if you've only seen it once. And that goes for everything because everything is digital and it can be compromised. And so I would just say make friends with uncertainty and then learn, continue to learn, use that mathematical brain of yours, Danny, and then compile solutions that respond to the complexity. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. A lot to think about. Well,
Good.
great conversation. Thank you for talking to me today. Good luck with pushing forward your narrative. I think it's great that people like you are bringing the real innovation and actually executing that. Thank you for that. And yeah, thank you again for joining.
Thank you, Danny, for doing what you're doing. You've talked to some incredible leaders, and may you get Hegseth on the line. That would be great.
Absolutely.
Okay.